Today I turn 55 years old. Half of a life I dedicated to the church. 27 years serving an institution that I loved more than myself. Strange to celebrate in exile, persecuted by those I called brothers. The leg is better. I still have a limp, but at least I can walk without my makeshift cane. Small victories. The worst storm has passed, both climate and my soul. I cried a lot in the last few days, not from physical pain, but from studying these new documents that came to me. For those who are seeing me for the first time, I am Father Thomas Berry, a former Vatican employee. I was excommunicated for exposing documents that prove the Church's involvement in decades of systematic abuse. And what I'm going to reveal today is perhaps the darkest page of this story. This is the case of the Niños Robados, the children stolen from Spain, a crime that lasted decades, involved thousands of victims, and had at its center priests, nuns, and doctors acting under the blessing of the ecclesiastical hierarchy. The smell of old paper transports me to the secret archives where these documents were hidden, files that few had access to. Every page I touch carries stories of unimaginable pain. Young mothers who had their children ripped from their arms with the justification that they were saving these children. Spain, 1936. The Civil War divides the country. On the one hand, Republicans. On the other, Franco's nationalists. The Church, fearing the anti-clericalism of the Republicans, openly supports Franco. What begins as political persecution soon turns into something more perverse. The belief that Marxist tendencies are transmitted genetically and that children born to Republicans or single mothers need to be saved through adoption into suitable families. Those of you who follow me know that I do not speak to attack faith. I share these truths because I believe that only by confronting the mistakes of the past can we truly honor the teachings of Christ. Share your thoughts in the comments as I show you these documents. I want to know how this story resonates with you. Many have shared family stories in the comments, creating a community of people committed to the truth, no matter how painful it may be. Let's get to the facts. This 1941 memorandum, signed by Cardinal Isidro Gómez y Tomás, Primate of Spain, established what they called the Protocol of National Redemption. Note the language: purify Spanish society from the seeds of red ideology. Let's understand how this tragedy began. Spain, 1936. The Civil War tears the country apart. On one side, Republicans and leftists fighting for social change. On the other, the nationalists led by General Francisco Franco, defending traditional values and the established order. The Catholic Church, deeply fearing the anti-clericalism of the Republicans, churches had been burned, priests murdered in the first months of the conflict, decided to openly support Franco. A decision that would tarnish its history for the next 80 years. Look at these images. Cardinals blessing Franco's troops, bishops giving the fascist salute alongside the dictator, Pope Pius XIII sending congratulatory messages for the Christian victory against atheistic communism. The alliance between throne and altar sealed in blood. The smell of wood burning now in this fireplace reminds me of what I felt when visiting the secret archives where I found these documents. That peculiar smell of old paper, mixed with incense that permeated the rooms. Silent corridors where terrible truths slept, waiting to be discovered. This memorandum from 1941 is signed by Cardinal Isidro Gómez y Tomás, Primate of Spain. It establishes what was called the National Redemption Protocol, a collaboration between church and state to, as the text says, purify Spanish society from the seeds of red ideology. Note the language. They don't talk about helping children in need, but about purifying society. Words reveal intentions. The ideology behind this was pseudoscientific and terrible. They believed that Marxist tendencies were transmitted genetically. Psychiatrist Antonio Vallejo Nayera, close to Franco, published studies arguing that Republicans and their families had phenopathies, hereditary psychobiological defects. He explicitly wrote that children of Republicans were mental degenerates who needed to be saved through adoption into appropriate families, Catholic and loyal to the regime. Many of you in the comments of the last video questioned how people of faith could justify such acts. The answer is in these pages. They constructed a distorted theology where saving souls justified any means. Comment on how you feel when you see how faith was manipulated to justify this crime. Your perspective is valuable to this community we are building, people who seek truth, not comfort. What began as ideology soon turned into a profitable business that would last for decades. Well beyond Franco's regime, the system has evolved. First, it focused on political prisoners, Republican women incarcerated after the war. Their children were literally taken for re-education. It then expanded to single mothers, considered morally and socially inadequate. It eventually became a systematic baby trafficking scheme that continued until the 1990s. This chart I compiled shows how the numbers have grown over time. In the early 1940s, hundreds of cases per year, mainly motivated by ideology. In the 1950s, there were already thousands when the financial aspect began to predominate. In the 60s and 70s, the peak, estimates of 15 to 20,000 babies per year. Even after the fall of Franco and the return of democracy in 1975, the practice continued. The system was so ingrained, so protected, that it continued to function for another 2 decades. These records show how the operation was financed. Childless couples, generally from the middle or upper class, paid sums, equivalent to thousands of euros today, to adopt, or rather buy, these babies. Money flowed through donations to Catholic hospitals, church-run orphanages, and other religious institutions. A perfectly structured system where children were commodities, biological mothers were discarded, and Christian charity was the perfect cover. In these hallways, women gave birth to children they would never meet. The cruelty of the system was calculated, meticulous. During childbirth, they were often over-sedated. When they woke up, they received the devastating news: your baby was stillborn. Some, more persistent, asked to see the body. The answer was almost always the same: we have already arranged the burial to save him more suffering. What these women didn't know was that, in another ward of the same hospital, their perfectly healthy babies were being given to couples who had paid handsomely for the blessing of a child. The same nuns who wiped away the tears of birth mothers prepared newborns for their new families. The same priests who offered spiritual comfort to grieving mothers baptized these children with new names, new identities, new stories. What I'm going to show you now is how this child-stealing machine worked, because it was exactly that, a machine, a meticulously organized system with defined steps and multiple participants. Check out this diagram I created based on the documents. The system was efficient in its calculated cruelty. It began with identifying victims, unsuitable women, single mothers, poor people, Republicans, anyone considered morally or politically questionable, were directed to Catholic hospitals or specific maternity wards. The cold in this cabin seems to intensify when I touch these papers. Each document carries the weight of shattered families, of violently severed maternal ties. The smell of old ink on these certificates reminds me that each signature, each stamp, represents a conscious decision to participate in this crime. My fingers shake as I hold these proofs. This death certificate, signed by Father Alonso Medina of the parish of San Sebastian in Madrid, declares the death of a boy born on January 12, 1967. Official cause of death: postpartum respiratory complications. It's false, completely false. I also have here the baptism record of the same child, carried out 3 days later in another parish, 200 kilometers away, with new parents. Same hospital registration number, same date of birth, same weight, 3.4 kilo. But different names, different stories. This is not an isolated case. I have dozens of these pairs of documents. The method was always the same. A birth, a false death, a new baptism, a new identity. Everything official, everything stamped, everything blessed by the church. When I watch their faces through the screen, I imagine the impact of these revelations. Some of you may have the same feeling I had upon discovering these documents, that mixture of disbelief, anger, and deep sadness. Leave a like on this video so we can amplify these voices that have been silenced for decades. Every like helps break the wall of silence that has protected this crime for so long. The truth needs this small gesture from you to reach more people. Children were sold for considerable sums to childless Catholic couples, generally aligned with the regime. This receipt, disguised as a donation for pious works, shows a value of 150,000 pesetas, equivalent to 6 months' average salary at the time. Note the carefully chosen language, voluntary contribution in gratitude for the child granted by divine grace, a pious facade for a commercial transaction of human beings. The cynicism is staggering. Here, another document, written instructions for adoptive couples on how to answer questions about pregnancy, including details like faking morning nausea and wearing progressively loose clothing. The falsification of maternity turned into a manual, a standard procedure. Those involved formed a well-structured and hierarchical network. Nothing happened by chance. Each participant had their specific role, their reward, their part in the collective lie. Doctors forged death certificates and conducted births, ensuring that mothers were adequately sedated so as not to see their babies. Midwives assisted these doctors and were often responsible for taking children away immediately after birth. Social workers worked to identify ideal candidates, mainly vulnerable. Women without the resources to question authorities. Nuns in shelters for single mothers served as perfect intermediaries, gaining women's trust only to betray them at the most vulnerable moment of their lives. Notaries legalized fraudulent adoptions, transforming theft into an apparently legitimate legal act. The coordination was impressive. Each Catholic hospital, each maternity ward involved had specific procedures. Which rooms to use, which doctors to call, which papers to prepare in advance. There were even codes in the patient's files. A red dot in the corner meant candidate for baby removal. The smell of wood burning in the fireplace reminds me of the dusty files where I found these lists, these instructions. Rooms that few were allowed to access, documents that should remain hidden forever. At the center of this operation, two main figures stand out for their extensive and documented participation. The doctor Eduardo Vela, director of a maternity hospital in Madrid, and the nun Sor Maria Gomez Valbuena, who worked as a social worker. They coordinated the trafficking of hundreds, possibly thousands, of babies over decades. Vela was known for his clinical efficiency and absolute discretion. Sor Maria for her network of connections that included everything from registry office employees to wealthy families looking for children. Together, they formed the nucleus of an operation that spread throughout Spain. Here is a letter signed by Sor Maria, dated 1968, where she openly discusses the need to increase the suggested contribution to offset increased operating costs. She refers to babies as packages and birth mothers as sources. Complete dehumanization transformed into administrative correspondence. This was not a crime, of a few deviant individuals. We cannot console ourselves with the thought of a few bad apples. It was an institutional system that operated for decades with the approval of the highest authorities. A system that operated in plain sight, protected by the power, prestige, and aura of holiness of the Church. The firelight illuminates these documents as I share them with you, and sometimes I think of the thousands of families who, right now, may be looking at photographs of lost relatives, not knowing that they are alive, with other names, other stories, other lives. Aging mothers who still mourn babies who never died, sons and daughters who grew up without knowing their true origins. Behind every document, every statistic, there is a human story. Faces, names, lives torn apart by this cruel system. Before I was forced to flee, before my safety was compromised, I was able to collect testimonies from some of these women. Voices I bring with me so that we never forget that we are talking about real people, not just numbers in official reports. I'm going to share something that breaks my heart. These are testimonies that hold the pain of decades, finally released in words. Listen carefully. Each voice represents thousands of others who remain silent.
I was 21 years old, single. My family abandoned me when they found out about the pregnancy. The nuns at the Santa Isabel convent took me in, saying they would take care of me. When I went into labor, I remember the nun giving me an injection. For the pain, she said. I woke up hours later, confused, feeling an inexplicable emptiness. They told me that my daughter had been stillborn. I started crying. I asked to see her. They denied. It's not good for you, they insisted. When I didn't give up, the Mother Superior said that they had already taken care of the body to spare me the suffering. For years, I lit candles for the birthday of a daughter I never met, until in 2010, years later, I accidentally found her baptism record in another city.
The fire in this fireplace is not enough to warm the cold I feel listening to these reports. The smell of burning wood mixes with the tears that I can no longer contain. Each statement carries decades of mourning, emptiness, and unanswered questions.
When I gave birth, I clearly heard my baby's cry. I remember that moment with crystal clear perfection. I instinctively reached out my arms, wanting to touch him, but the doctor signaled and a nurse applied something to my arm. When I woke up, a priest was at my side. Your son was born with serious problems, he said. God took him to heaven. I asked to see his body. We have already arranged everything, he replied. He was buried in consecrated ground. That grief consumed me for 43 years, until my grandson, researching our family tree on the internet, found a man with DNA compatible with ours. Not only is my son alive, he has 3 children that I didn't even know existed.
The cruelty of this system was not limited to the moment of the robbery. Think about the prolonged trauma, the eternal mourning for a child who never died, on birth dates marked silently each year, in imagined faces that never existed. Each of these cases that I have documented represents a life completely altered, a destiny rewritten by force. Maria Luisa Torres, Barcelona, 1971. At 17, pregnant and alone, she sought help at a Catholic hospital. They said their son died during childbirth. They never showed the body, claiming that they had already arranged the burial out of charity. In 2012, through a victim search group, he was found alive, raised by a middle-class family in Valencia. The reunion was broadcast on Spanish television. 2 strangers united by blood, separated by an institutional crime. Adelina Garcia, Madrid, 1968. Married, but with a husband identified as a Republican sympathizer. She clearly heard the cry of her born baby, but was then sedated. When he woke up, they said the boy had died of breathing difficulties. Decades later, when trying to obtain documents for a memorial, he discovered that the hospital records had no documentation of the supposed death, no records of births followed by deaths, no bodies, no burials. His son simply disappeared from official records. Carmen Rodriguez, Seville, 1975, gave birth to twins. They allowed her to see one of them briefly before sedating her. When they woke up, they reported that the second baby had been born dead. When she insisted on seeing the body, she was reprimanded for not accepting God's will. In 2018, her surviving son, taking DNA tests to investigate a genetic condition, discovered an identical twin brother living less than 100 kilometers away. Even after irrefutable scientific confirmation, the church refused to provide birth records. The pattern is always the same: sedation, separation, lies about deaths, refusal to show bodies, burials supposedly already carried out, and always, always, the invocation of the divine will, of Christian charity, of the acceptance of suffering as a virtue. The cold of this cabin penetrates my bones as I examine these accounts, but it is nothing compared to the cold these women have carried in their hearts for decades. Some discovered the truth when they were old, when much of their lives had passed. Others died without ever knowing that their children were alive, raised by other families just a few kilometers away. This case documented here is particularly disturbing. Pilar Navarro, Valencia, 1962. After being informed of the death of her newborn daughter, she attempted suicide in the hospital itself. She was admitted to a Catholic psychiatric institution where she remained for 3 years, diagnosed with hysterical melancholy. The documents I obtained show that his daughter was adopted by a local judge who made a generous donation to the same religious order that ran both the hospital and the psychiatric institution. The same institution that caused the trauma profited from treating its consequences. It is estimated that approximately 300,000 babies were stolen during this period. 300,000. Imagine an entire city of people who don't know their true origins, who live lives built on lies. Parents who don't know they are parents. Children who don't know they are children. Brothers who pass each other on the streets without recognizing the same blood that runs through their veins. The most terrifying, the system continued to function well after the end of Franco's dictatorship until the mid-1990s. After the dictator's death in 1975, as Spain transitioned to democracy, the purely political motivation diminished, but the profitable business continued. The system had become self-sustaining, a well-oiled machine of institutionalized theft that generated millions for hospitals, religious orders, and intermediaries. We can talk about individual cases for hours. We could fill entire days with the stories of these women, with the stories of these shattered families. But the crucial question we need to face is, to what level did institutional approval of this system reach? Would it be possible for an operation of this magnitude to occur without the knowledge and consent of the highest ecclesiastical authorities? The answer is in this book. I feel its weight in my trembling hands, not just the physical weight, but the moral weight of what it contains. This book, bound in red leather, contains the minutes of meetings of the Spanish Episcopal Conference between 1952 and 1971. Access to these documents is extremely restricted, kept in the most reserved archives of the Vatican and the Spanish Episcopal Conference. Not even many cardinals are allowed to consult them, but someone within the system, someone whose conscience finally spoke louder than the vow of obedience, risked much to let the truth be known. The smell of these old pages brings back memories of the days I spent secretly studying them, knowing that every minute increased the risk of being discovered. The dust accumulated around its edges made me sneeze several times in those silent rooms where few had access. Each page turned was another step on the path that would eventually lead me to this forced exile. These minutes from a meeting held on March 20th, 1957, chaired by the then Cardinal Primate Enrique Play Daniel, expressly mention the problem of children of red elements and unanimously approve the continuation of the Christian relocation program, even while openly acknowledging, and this is crucial, that certain extraordinary methods were being employed. Note the carefully chosen language, extraordinary methods, i.e., euphemism for falsifying documents, kidnapping babies, systematically lying to vulnerable mothers. The minutes go on to detail the need to maintain absolute discretion and establish specific procedures to ensure that the origins of these children are never traceable. The document also mentions the creation of a special support fund to adequately remunerate doctors, nurses, and administrative staff involved in the program, ensuring their continuous dedication to the cause. In other words, an organized payment system for all participants in the scheme. Here are the signatures, not just the Cardinal Primate, but all the bishops present, 15 in total. Each of them knowingly signed this document, approving what they knew to be a crime against these families, against these women, against these innocent children. It is indisputable proof that the highest levels of the Catholic hierarchy in Spain not only knew about, but actively approved of the program. It's incredible how, in these same minutes, just 2 pages later, they discuss the importance of the sanctity of the family and the protection of life from conception, without apparently realizing the monstrous hypocrisy of destroying royal families while preaching the family as a sacred value. The theological justification was perverse and elaborate. They argued that these children were being saved doubly, both from the Marxist influence they supposedly inherited from Republican parents and from immoral homes in the case of single mothers. They built an entire distorted theology where the end justified the means, where lies became a virtue when in the service of saving souls. In sermons and spiritual retreats for the medical personnel involved, priests and bishops stressed that they were doing God's work, that the temporary moral discomfort of deceiving mothers was insignificant compared to the eternal benefit of raising these children in truly Christian homes. This personal diary of the auxiliary bishop of Barcelona, Ramon Buxarrais, from 1968, contains disturbing reflections on the program. He writes, "Sometimes I wonder whether the methods employed are justifiable, even given the nobility of our objectives. But then I remember the words of Cardinal, name redacted. In times of spiritual warfare, extraordinary measures are necessary. The Lord will not judge us by the rigidity of our methods, but by the purity of our intentions." This mentality permeated all layers of the hierarchy. The Church positioned itself as a moral savior, as protector of these children, while participating in one of the largest human trafficking schemes in European history. The moral arrogance is astonishing. Believing yourself so absolutely right, so divinely guided, that even obvious crimes turned into acts of charity in your distorted perception. For those who have accompanied me this far on this painful journey, I understand your commitment to the truth, even when it is difficult to face. Subscribe to this channel to follow the next revelations. Each new person who joins us represents another witness to these stories that have remained in the shadows for too long. Your registration is an act of solidarity with these families who have been seeking justice for decades. Together, we form a community that does not allow these truths to be buried again. What about Rome? Could it be possible that the Vatican, the center of the global Catholic Church, was unaware of what was happening in Spain? This document definitively answers this question. This internal report, sent to the Vatican Secretariat of State in July 1963 during the papacy of Paul VI, describes in detail the success of the Spanish program and, even more disturbingly, suggests its application in other regions with similar problems, specifically mentioning Argentina and Chile, where military dictatorships allied with the church have also separated children from their biological families. The report details the spiritual benefits and positive financial results of the program, mentioning that significant contributions have been made to the works of the church as a result of the successful adoptions. It even includes statistics, cold numbers representing human lives, of how many children have been rehomed annually since 1950. Even more revealing is the seal stamped on the document, seen and approved for continuation, signed by a Secretary of State official whose name is partially visible. The date is clear, August 17th, 1963. Weeks later, documents show significant bank transfers from the Holy See to specific hospitals in Spain, those same hospitals that figure prominently in the documented cases of stolen babies. Rome knew, the popes of that period knew, and they didn't just allow it to continue. They provided financial support, institutional legitimacy, and protection for those involved. When isolated allegations occasionally surfaced, they were quickly silenced through transfers of questioning priests, diplomatic interventions with local authorities, and even the threat of excommunication for Catholics who persisted in investigating the matter. It is not easy for me, who has dedicated my adult life to the church, to share these truths. Every document I show, every piece of evidence I reveal, is like reliving the devastating moment when my faith in the institution, not in God, but in the human institution that claimed to represent him, was irreparably shaken. The fire in the fireplace is dwindling, as is the daylight outside. Shadows lengthen on the walls of this cabin as I share these dark truths. The cold intensifies the pain in my injured leg, a constant reminder of the price of defying such entrenched powers. Still, I don't regret it, because I deeply believe that true faith cannot be built on lies, that true charity cannot be born from crimes, that true Christianity cannot flourish in institutions that place their reputation and their power above the humanity of those they are supposed to serve. The storm is milder outside today. The wolves are silent, as if even nature is pausing to absorb the weight of these revelations. But for thousands of Spanish families, the internal storm never ceased. Trauma has no expiration date. The pain of a mother separated from her child does not lessen as the decades pass. It only transforms, solidifies, becomes part of her identity. What happened to all these people? How did this story finally start to come to light? And what happened when the victims finally found the courage and means to seek justice? For decades, these stories remained isolated tragedies, private, silent, unacknowledged pains. Mothers who questioned the circumstances of their babies' deaths were labeled hysterical, emotionally disturbed, or simply unable to accept God's will. Some adoptees who questioned their origins were given vague answers or told to show gratitude rather than curiosity. Everything began to change in the early 2000s. This report from the newspaper El País from 2002 was one of the first to connect isolated cases and suggest a systematic pattern. Journalist Jesus Duvar, following an apparently small lead about irregularities in birth records, ended up discovering dozens of cases with identical characteristics. His investigation inspired other journalists, and soon what appeared to be isolated cases were revealed to be a national phenomenon. Observe the evolution of media coverage. In 2002, they spoke of possible irregularities in adoptions. In 2008, they already mentioned suspicions of baby trafficking. In 2011, finally, the complete truth. Systematic baby theft scheme involving church and hospitals for decades. The truth, as always, emerged gradually, despite all attempts to suppress it. Since then, thousands of Spaniards have discovered that they may have been victims of this scheme. Both parents who lost children and adults who suspect they were illegally adopted. Victims' associations have sprung up across Spain, many led by people like Inés Perez, who at age 65 discovered that her birth certificate was fake. Or Eduardo Martinez, who always felt like he didn't belong in his family, only to discover at age 43 that he had been bought by his adoptive parents. The advancement of DNA technology was crucial. Genetic databases have allowed people separated by this criminal scheme to finally find each other. The sound of the fire crackling in this cabin's fireplace reminds me of the warmth I saw in these people's eyes, when after decades of forced separation, they could finally recognize their own blood in a stranger. Some had encounters that we can only describe as miraculous. This photo shows Antonio Barroso, who discovered at age 38 that he had been bought for 200,000 pesetas, the equivalent of almost a year's average salary at the time. For decades, he lived without questioning his origins until a family friend, on his deathbed, revealed that both had been bought from nuns in Barcelona. Determined to discover the truth, Antonio created one of the first victims' associations and submitted their DNA to a database. Through these tests, he located his biological mother, Consuelo, who had been informed that her baby had died minutes after birth. Here, the moment they met for the first time, in 2011. The expression in the eyes of this woman, already 80 years old, as she hugged the son she believed dead for almost 4 decades. There are pains too deep to be expressed in words, just as there are joys that transcend any language. This is Pilar Navarro, who I mentioned earlier. After leaving the psychiatric institution where she was admitted for hysterical melancholy following the alleged death of her daughter, she spent 50 years lighting candles on the birthday of a baby she never met. In 2016, at the age of 83, he discovered that his daughter was alive, raised less than 100 kilometers away. The daughter, Maria Dolores, grew up unaware of her origins until a family health investigation revealed genetic incompatibilities with her parents. Their first meeting was broadcast on national television, becoming a symbol of the search for justice and truth. These meetings, while deeply moving, are also complex and painful. Think about the shock of discovering, after a lifetime, that your identity was built on lies, that those you called parents participated, albeit as beneficiaries, in a terrible crime, that your real mother did not abandon you, but was the victim of a cruel system that convinced her that you had died. But for the vast majority, justice has been systematically denied. Spanish authorities treated the case with institutional indifference for years. The so-called historical memory law of 2007, which sought to recognize the crimes of the Francoist regime, barely mentioned this issue. Prosecutors frequently dismissed cases citing statute of limitations or lack of sufficient evidence. The church in particular has erected walls to protect itself from accountability. He refused access to his files, citing privacy of those involved and sacramental secrecy. When pressed by court orders, many records were mysteriously lost, damaged by mold, or destroyed in accidental fires. In one particularly egregious case, birth records from a Catholic hospital in Valencia went completely missing the night before a court-ordered inspection. This clipping from 2018 shows protesters in front of the Spanish Episcopal Conference demanding access to the archives. Look at the posters. Where is my son? The truth does not prescribe. Open the files. Many protesters are elderly, carrying photos of babies they never saw grow up. Time is running out for many of them. Every funeral for a mother who never met her child is another small victory for the system that benefited from silence. The few legal cases that managed to move forward faced immense obstacles. The most emblematic case was against the Dr. Eduardo Vela, one of the main people responsible for the scheme at the San Ramon Hospital in Madrid. After years of testimony and evidence, he was finally found guilty in 2018 of the crimes of kidnapping, forgery of documents, and violation of parental rights. But he did not serve a single day in prison. The court ruled that the crimes had expired, although their consequences continue to affect the victims to this day. Sor Maria Gomez Valbuena, The nun who coordinated hundreds of clandestine adoptions died in 2013, aged 87, before facing trial, taking with her secrets that could have helped countless families reunite. In the last years of her life, when journalists questioned her, she simply replied, "I did God's work. My conscience is clear." Hospital records, when not destroyed, often contain unexplained gaps. This document from a hospital in Barcelona shows a birth record followed by a blank page where the death certificate should have been. In another hospital in Madrid, they discovered a curious pattern. Supposedly deceased babies were always registered with the same weight, 2.5 kilo, regardless of whether they were premature or full-term, boys or girls. The fight continues to this day. These are letters I have received over the last few months through secure channels. Maria Jesus, 47 years old. I always knew I was adopted, but recently I discovered inconsistencies in my documents. My parents told me that I was a gift from God through the good nuns. When I asked the hospital for my records, they say they were lost in a flood. How can I find my real mother? Jose Antonio, 53 years old. On my deathbed, my mother confessed that she was not my biological mother, that she bought me from a priest in Seville in 1967. It cost all the money we had, she said, but the priest assured us that we were doing a good deed. Now I don't know who I am. Carmen, 82 years old. I still dream about my daughter every night. In the dream, she always has the same newborn face. She never ages. They say there are no records of her in the hospital. How can a child be born and there is no record? I will die without knowing her adult face. The pain persists. Aging mothers who were never able to hug their children, who carried decades of mourning for children who never died. Men and women living under false identities, unaware of their true origins, often with inexplicable feelings of not belonging to the families that raised them. Biological brothers who never knew of each other's existence. Entire families destroyed by a system that treated human beings as commodities. And for those who managed to uncover the truth, new emotional and legal complications arise. How do you prosecute adoptive parents who may have been unwitting accomplices? How to rebuild biological relationships after decades of separation? How to deal with anger, grief, identity confusion? These wounds are too deep to be easily healed. The cruelest thing is that time is running out. Many biological mothers have passed away without knowing the fate of their children. Records keep disappearing. Witnesses die, carrying their secrets. Each day that passes represents another small victory for those who hope that this crime will eventually be forgotten, buried along with its victims. I think about how truth, like these flakes, can seem fragile, easily melted by the heat of power and denial. But when the flakes accumulate, they form something powerful enough to alter the entire landscape. It's like this with these stories. Each testimony, each document revealed, each family reunited is another flake of truth falling over the cloak of silence that has protected the guilty for so long. This is just one of many crimes that the church I served for 27 years committed and then tried to cover up. I do not reveal this out of revenge or bitterness, although many within the hierarchy try to portray me as such. I do this because I deeply believe that only the truth can bring healing, both for the victims and for the institution itself. An untreated wound only deepens the infection. An unfaced truth will never allow true reconciliation. The smell of this last candle's melting wax reminds me of the countless candles I lit during my years as a priest. Baptism candles, celebrating new lives. Funeral candles, honoring lives lost. How many of these celebrations were based on lies? How many baptisms have consecrated falsified identities? How many funerals have mourned children who never died? The greatest pain for me on this lonely birthday is not the injured leg that makes me limp, nor the biting cold of this mountain that penetrates to my bones, nor even the constant chase that forces me to change hiding places frequently. The real pain, the one that keeps me awake on long winter nights, is knowing that the institution I dedicated my life to has so profoundly betrayed the teachings of Christ, Jesus, who defended the vulnerable, Jesus, who valued children above all others, Jesus, who said that the truth would set us free. How could we so completely distort your message? How could we create such elaborate systems of cruelty in the name of those who preached compassion? So the church tried to cover its crimes with layers and layers of institutional silence, denial, obstruction. But just as spring eventually melts the snow and reveals what lies beneath, the truth inevitably emerges. No cloak of silence, however heavy, can forever suppress the screams of mothers separated from their children. These stolen children, now adults, deserve to know who they are. It's not just a legal right. It's a fundamental human right to know your origins, your history, your true identity. These mothers, many now aging, deserve answers. After decades of mourning children who never died. And the church, the institution, not the faith, must recognize its role, ask for genuine forgiveness, not just empty words, and above all, open its archives completely. As I organize these documents, I feel the weight, not just of the paper, but of the lives they represent. Each sheet, each falsified record, each confidential memo represents a family torn apart, an identity stolen, a story forcibly rewritten. I received this message from one of the victims, one of many who reach me through safe channels, despite all efforts to isolate myself. It was written by Manuel, a 53-year-old man who recently discovered his true origins. Father Thomas, I do not seek revenge. I do not want to destroy the church or ruin the reputation of the people who raised me. They were good parents, even though they were unwitting accomplices to a crime. I just want to know who I am. I want to see the face of the woman who gave birth to me. I want to understand why my entire life was built on a lie. I want my children to know their true genetic history, their true heritage. It's not too much to ask, is it? The truth shouldn't be an unaffordable luxury. Manuel's words echo those of hundreds of others. It is not revenge that these people seek. It's something much more fundamental, the right to know your own story. This is from Maria Elena, 86 years old. I'm nearing the end of my life. Before I leave, I just want to know if my daughter lived a happy life, if she had children, my grandchildren who I never met, if she inherited my smile like everyone in my family. That's all I ask. From Javier, 42. When I discovered I was bought from nuns, everything in my life finally made sense. That feeling of not belonging, that inexplicable difference. We need the truth, not just for justice, but for sanity. From Sister Concepcion, 78 years old, a nun who witnessed these crimes in her convent. I lived decades in complicit silence, terrified of speaking out against my superiors. May God forgive me for every day that I did not report what I saw. If you've watched this story so far, share this video. I know the topic is heavy and that we all prefer lighter content on social media. Cute cats and dancing are much easier to digest than stolen babies and institutionalized suffering. But by sharing this story, you're not just spreading a video. You're extending a line of hope to someone who may have been searching for answers for decades. Your sharing could be the link that connects a mother to a lost child, or gives someone the courage to question their official story. It's something small for you, but it can completely change someone else's life. So spread it like it's the juiciest gossip in the neighborhood. Because let's face it, revealing secret Vatican schemes is the mother of all gossip. If you work for the church and have access to information about these cases or other abuses, there are safe ways to share the truth without compromising your position. Redemption begins with honesty. Remember that true loyalty to Christ and the church does not mean protecting criminals or perpetuating lies. True loyalty is helping the institution face its mistakes and redeem itself through truth and justice. For many within the church who know the truth but remain silent, I know you are there, watching perhaps even this video. I understand your fear. I lived this fear, the fear of being ostracized, of losing your place, your community, your identity, the fear of breaking vows of obedience, the fear of betraying those who trusted you. But I ask, what is the biggest betrayal? Expose past crimes or allow them to continue affecting victims in the present? And for those who still try to silence these stories, who still hunt me across these mountains, who may be watching this video to track my location, know the truth can no longer be buried. These voices will not be silenced. These documents are safe in multiple hands, in multiple countries. Capturing or silencing me will not stop these truths from continuing to emerge. Every threat I receive, every attempt to discredit my testimony only confirms the importance of these revelations. If they were lies, as some claim, why so much effort to suppress them? If they were fakes, why not just open the files and prove me wrong? The truth does not fear investigation, only the lie demands constant protection. My birthday wish, as I turn 55 years away from all I've known, is simple. May these separated families find peace and answers. May the truth prevail over institutional comfort. May justice, even late, bring some measure of healing. And may the church that I still love, despite everything, find its way back to the true teachings of Christ. Compassion above appearances, truth above reputation, humanity above power. In the next video, if I can stay safe, and there are days when I hear footsteps too close to the cabin, it's a global system that we need to expose, to finally dismantle. From Argentina to Chile, from Ireland to Australia, identical patterns have emerged wherever the church has had sufficient power to operate above the law. The flame goes out, just as so many lives have been irrevocably changed by this cruel system. But the truth, like this recording, remain. Darkness may temporarily dominate, but it cannot erase what has been revealed. Pray for me as I pray for you, and especially for these broken families. The truth may be painful, but it is the only path to healing.